Did you notice how most of the trans people who attack cisgender and so on and whoever doubts them, I'm not bluffing here, I read many texts on it.
What's that accent? This is a Slavoj Zizek accent. He's, what, Slovakian? Slovenian? I always forget which one. I've heard other people of that ethnicity. Slovenian. I've heard other Slovenian people speak, and they don't sound quite like him. Part of it is the accent. Part of it is that he has a nervous tic. Part of it is that he always has a gallon of phlegm in his throat. It's a him accent. It's kind of like how Arnold Schwarzenegger has an incredibly distinct accent, and it sounds kind of like an Austrian accent, but it's mostly just a Schwarzenegger accent.
By them, by extreme trans advocates, their ultimate argument is not some positive argument, but it's always, I may be biologically measure me a man or whatever, a woman, but I don't feel to be that. It's reference to some sense of identity. And
yeah, he's never been that great on trans issues. I feel like the more I go over this, the more like obvious and straightforward it seems, and the more I'm confused by other people's confusion by it, if that makes any sense. In this like war against conceptual identity or whatever, I have to remind everyone that I know quite a few trans people, and I have never met any of them who genuinely, sincerely doubt or deny anything objectively biological about their bodies. Occasionally, you'll find a trans chick who, when very horny, will be like, yo, rail my pussy, and she means like fuck her ass or whatever. But when she says that, she's saying it because she's horny. She doesn't literally, but she's not making an explicit biological argument, you know, there. Like, she, like, that's, there's not like a case of the world. It's not like a descriptive claim. You know, you don't answer like, what do you mean by that? You just fuck them. Like, that's fine, you know, just have sex, whatever. I just, the biological claims that are made are just not, they're not even on the table with regards to contesting. The only thing that I hear that people argue about is like, do hormones change your sex? Which, yeah, they do. That's the point. Your sex is a collection. Your sex is a sort of simplified interpretation of a multitude of biological sexual characteristics. So, leaving the biological claims aside, Zizek here claims with some, I guess, incredulity, or incredulousness, like, it seems to be an identity thing, which, yeah, that's gender. That's the whole point. There's sex and there's gender. Let's see where he's going with this, I guess.
But even with so-called normal cis persons, the passage is not smooth. It's not that I am a man and then I'm too lazy to deconstruct myself through trans procedures and so on, so I simply accept that I'm a man. No. From being biologically a man in the brutal sense of my biological identity, penis, testicles, and so on, to becoming a man in the symbolic sense, and that's the point of psychoanalysis, it's a long and painful process with many cuts, brutal changes, shifts, and so on and so on.
I think I understand what he's saying here. He's basically saying that, like, even if your argument is that you're a man because of your biology, the process of becoming a man in a social sense is like this grueling social like, if being a man was truly just biological, you wouldn't need to learn how to be one. You would simply be born with a penis and big flappy balls. And that would be that. Congrats, you were born into it. Like, you don't have to learn to be brown-haired. You're simply born with brown hair. But being a man obviously can't be purely biological, because if it was, nobody would have to be taught to be it. It would simply be a fact of your birth. Having a penis is a fact of your birth, or not if you don't have one, I guess. Being a man is like, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to learning about the incredibly nuanced and often contradictory social standards that being a man means. I think he's mixing up the social aspect with the genetic aspect. Well, it's difficult to parse what he's saying in the best of times, but I think he's basically arguing that, like, even for a cisgender person, being a man falls in the realm of psychoanalysis, not purely biology, which is true. He is kind of like linguistically conflating sex and gender here, but I think the point that he's making here is actually quite good.
In this sense, all our sexual identity is trans. And this...
There you go. See? That was easy enough to parse.
many trans ideologists basically have no place for the Freudian unconscious.
Okay. He's going to lose me a little bit here with the Freud shit, you know. But, okay.
It's simply how I feel, my felt self-identity.
By which you mean the consciously felt, the feeling that you have that you recognize.
Okay, okay, I'm going to be charitable here because I do think highly of his intelligence. I think that what Zizek is saying here is that a lot of trans people are unwilling to engage with the idea that there are underlying psychological mechanisms that inform their gender identity and that it's not purely a matter of identity. What he's essentially saying is like, you know, you were born a male and you now identify as a woman, and that process is something that involved a like a sort of extensive psychoanalytical buildup. There were traumas that happened, there were realizations, there were like heel turns, there were moments of confusion that built you to what you are now. But trans people don't want to engage with that. They just want to simplify it to the identity thing. And what he's saying in addition to this is, in fairness, what he is describing, this psychoanalytic process that leads you to believe in your gender or whatever, also applies to cisgender people. Does that make sense? Basically, he's saying like everyone's gender identity is a product of, in essence, sort of psychological trauma of a sort of a dialectical engagement with what you believe you are and what the world believes you are, and the fight and the disappointment and the confusion, the misunderstanding, the socialization that leads you to there. And that's true for cis and for trans people. And he's criticizing trans allies in the trans movement for not engaging with that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with what he's saying, but the contrary argument here is, of course, the reason why a lot of trans people don't want to engage with this is because, first of all, cis people don't have to. Cisgender people are never asked, like, hey, cisgender guy, can you engage with the psychoanalytic process by which you came to realize yourself to be a guy? Cisgender men aren't asked to do that. And also, we're not exactly operating in a neutral environment, right? Like, trans people aren't asked about the origins of their identity in like a purely intellectual way. Like, people aren't asking because they're curious. Overwhelmingly, these questions come from a place of like invalidation. And the invalidation isn't a good faith engagement with the thought process, right? It's not like conservatives are coming up with like excellent counter arguments to the psychoanalytic process or anything. They're basically just running up to you and screaming that you can't be the gender you say you are because of your genitals. I thought this would be worse, by the way, when this was linked. I'm actually quite happy with this, I feel, what he's saying. I mean, I think that there could be a counterpoint here, but yeah, no, this isn't at all like transphobic, I don't think.
Biological determinists, they claim sexual identity is biologically determined, or in whatever way. It cannot be an effect of social pressures, ideological choices. But then they are so afraid of trans education in schools. I would say if they believe...
good point. If you think that being, if all this is biologically determined, then why are you afraid of what you perceive to be instruction?
Why be so afraid about all that? But not...
And if you believe that a person's true identity can be misshapen by grooming or by deceptive instruction, why are you in favor of conversion therapy or teaching people that you can't be trans or can't be gay? You're essentially openly admitting to doing the thing you're afraid of the opposition doing. Anyway, I think we've gotten what we need to out of this. That was a good discussion. I'm glad we talked about the trans stuff.